Thank you. Always a pleasure. Welcome back, everybody. I'll keep this short. My name's Taiki, as was mentioned. I'm a proud CFO member that just volunteers just to help MC these things a little bit. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll answer them towards the end. I'll make sure that they're in a right order. And if you have any questions, just put them into the chat. Otherwise, the floor is really for Johnathan Reitz. Please welcome Johnathan.
Good evening, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you about what is not arguably just is the coolest bird in the world. Yeah, some of you might say fighting words or whatnot, but y'all are wrong if you have a different favorite because this is the best bird that there is. Um, Let me get sharing on my presentation here. Bear with me. All right. What are y'all seeing? Does that look like a prairie chicken head taking up the screen?
It looks exactly like that.
All right, sounds good. All right, so here is the bird of the hour, the lesser prairie chicken. Tonight, I'm gonna more than anything just talk about Colorado's lesser prairie chicken story. You know, a bit of history and background on where we were, and then what has happened to get us to where we are now, and what's going on right now, and maybe what the future holds. And then I don't know, maybe throwing out an idea or two of how folks can help, but. Um, there we go. This first and foremost is just a little about me. I'm a wildlife biologist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Sometimes I like to throw this slide up because it really communicates well the reality of my life. I'll give you a second that to absorb it. So, unfortunately, this is the sad truth of what I actually do. And once again, here I am in front of the computer doing it. But there are some good days and some good times, such as um, lately, and I apologize. I was apologizing to Taiki earlier on if I stumble and mumble or whatnot tonight. I'm gonna blame it on sleep deprivation. Been working a lot of 16 to 18 hour days on a black-footed ferret, badger, swift fox research project all fall. So it's been a long grind. And we just released 20 black-footed ferrets with collars on them just a couple of days ago, which is a pretty big deal. It's like the first time it's been done in 30 years. And then additionally, I have little backpacks on badgers and transmitters on Swift Fox, and got all sorts of good stuff going on Southern Plains Land Trust Heartland Ranch. But back to the birds because I know that's what you guys are here for. So these are the extant or living prairie grouse or prairie chickens, I guess that still exist here. You know, unfortunately, we lost one, the heath hen on the eastern seaboard, lost that earlier last century. So we have the lesser prairie chicken that we're talking about tonight with its range found in Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. You can see on the map right there, um, the dark green shows kind of the current range, and the light green shows the historic range. I guess I need to edit this slide. It says threatened there for the northern population segment and endangered for the southern population segment. Just really not that long ago, a little over a month ago, the bird was delisted due to some court rulings and politics, really, having nothing to do with the biology of the bird. Right now, currently, Fish and Wildlife Service is doing another review, and there's a lot of politics at play there and whatnot. So, anyways, in the middle there is the Atwater prairie chicken, and this is an extremely endangered bird. Anywhere, any year, the population runs from about 40 to about 200 birds in the wild. And this is a kind of a sad state of affairs as far as a bird that um, a lot of work has to do to keep the bird out in the wild. They only live in about 10,000 acres of habitat that's left for them down in the Gulf Coast portion of Texas. And they go as far as most of the birds are raised in captivity. Birds that are hatched out in the wild, researchers or biologists actually put these cages around the nests to protect the hens while they're nesting out there. And then they do insect sweeps to get bugs to feed the hen. And then when the nest hatches, they'll take the cage and they'll move it around as the brood moves around. Just they go to great lengths to try to keep this bird going. And this is a place that I really sincerely hope we never see the lesser prairie chicken at. And then you have the greater prairie chicken, a bird of the northern Great Plains, whereas the lesser prairie chicken is a bird of the southern Great Plains. The greater prairie chicken is doing much better. Um, and I always have to throw in, I don't know, whoever named the greater prairie chicken, if I had access to a time machine, I think before I saw the dinosaurs, I would go back and kick that person in the shin because they could have done a lot better than lesser prairie chicken and greater prairie chicken. There's nothing lesser about the lesser prairie chicken. So as you can see in the pictures here, they all look pretty darn similar. For the males, as you see in the picture, they have these cool pinnae, these feathers that they put up in the air, kind of like little devil horns, which kind of makes sense when they're on a lek and displaying. It helps them to be seen when the grass is, mid shin high or so. And then they all have air sacs that they make their sounds, their booming sounds with. I'll play some audio later on of that. The greater prairie chicken and the lesser prairie chicken sound very different. They don't sound really anything alike. The Atwater sounds very similar to the greater prairie chicken. The Atwater is very closely related to the greater prairie chicken. So, like I said, the greater prairie chickens fortunately are doing much better, though you can still see that they are not found on nearly as much of the range as they used to be. So here the star of the show is the lesser prairie chicken. What we're talking about tonight on the right is a male. You can see these eye combs that are inflated as they get excited and they're in the breeding season. They'll puff up those eye combs, and then they have their red air sacs and then those pinnae. And the females, they actually have all of that too. It's just really muted and small. So like their pinnae are really, really small. They have air sacs that are hidden, and they have tiny little eye combs that you're probably not going to see and never get like that bright yellow. The lesser prairie chicken hens will actually boom though. They will gobble. I've spent probably almost 2 years of my life's worth of mornings watching prairie chickens, spent a lot of time with these birds, and only twice have I seen females boom. And I wouldn't call it booming, but they will make a sound and inflate an air sac. And usually that's when you have a whole bunch of hens together and they're fighting and getting after each other. And all of a sudden the pinnae will come up and they'll actually make a little sound too. So, um, if somebody give me a thumbs up so it's not just awkward silence, I'm going to go ahead and play some audio here real quick. You able to hear that, Taiki?
Oh yes, crystal clear. I feel like I'm out there with you.
So the lesser prairie chicken is a lekking species. So basically, a lek is just a breeding ground where the males come every single year to display and show off for the females. So these lesser chickens, they'll show up usually. The males will start wandering to the lek sometime in February, usually by the last week of March. They're all on the lek and they're getting after it. April is kind of prime time for breeding. Most often about, the second week of April is when most of the females will show up, though they'll show up anytime over about a 2 to 3 month period of time. The males are out there every single morning and every single evening, dancing and fighting and calling and chase each other around. And the females, they kind of have it easy on this one. They show up for a morning or two or three or four, maybe for 5 or 10 minutes at a time, and pick their male, and that's it. Though I don't know about the trade-off though, where the female has to go then sit on a nest for 26 or 28 days, only leaving the nest for a few minutes a day or a little bit just to go feed. So the lek displays are really quite something. Usually you get, you know, average lek size is about 10 males. That's going to be a pretty good strong lek. And There's really a quite a display. Again, not that I'm biased or anything, but I've watched a lot of greater prairie chickens out there too, and the lesser prairie chickens put on a better show. So if you haven't seen the lesser prairie chicken, and if you ever have the opportunity, which I know that's kind of tough right now, but if you ever have the opportunity, I highly recommend it. They're really a fun bird to watch. Um, I need to throw out real quick, I guess that sound recording that I had there, that is a recording that I took on the Comanche National Grasslands. The last year that lesser prairie chickens were found on the Comanche grasslands before we did a translocation project. I'll talk a little bit about that, but it always is kind of just sad to me to hear that recording, is that's kind of like echoes of the past, and unfortunately we lost all of those birds. So this is a slide with the basically the Lesser Prairie Chicken range. It's kind of you'd seen it before. The Lesser Prairie Chicken range is broken up into four ecoregions. Each ecoregion is named after the primary habitat type found within that ecoregion. So in Colorado, we have the sand sagebrush ecoregion shown in purple there. That's going to incorporate basically the Big Sandy, kind of Sand Creek, Rush Creek, the sand sage south of the Arkansas River and east of Lamar, and then the sand sage down associated with the Cimarron and Comanche grasslands. You have the shortgrass CRP ecoregion in Kansas predominantly, and then it's extended a little bit over into Colorado, as we actually have seen an expansion of birds into Colorado up in that neck of the woods. The mixed grass prairie ecoregion, south central Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle, and into the Texas Panhandle, and then the Shinnery Oak ecoregion. We'll be primarily focusing on the sand sagebrush ecoregion and talking a little bit about the shortgrass ecoregion tonight as well. So I'll be referring back to this quite a bit. So in order to kind of put stuff into perspective on kind of where we're at, it's really important that we need to know kind of where we came from. I want to read something to you that's going to kind of give you some perspective on how abundant prairie chickens were back in the day. I'm reading a little bit from the life histories of North American gallinaceous birds by Arthur Cleveland Bent. This was written in the late 30s, early 40s, and it has accounts in here from 1914. So, um, in here, it's talking about the range of the lesser prairie chicken. The range in its entirety would probably cover no greater than a fourth of the state of Kansas, and the most abundant nucleus is in Stevens and Morton counties. Here they are quite plentiful in its sand hill and bunchgrass fastness, where in the fall of the year they sometimes gather in flocks of several hundred birds, roaming where they will, a typical bird of the long grass country. So Morton and Stevens counties, those are the two counties, and they're small Kansas counties that are immediately across the border, just east of Baca County, Colorado. So if the epicenter of lesser prairie chickens, where the highest numbers were, was just right there on the border, that's pretty strong indication that we had really good numbers of birds in Colorado across the line. So he has some accounts in here from this guy, with the last name of Colvin, who was an avid birder, and back then and still to this day, there's a fair bit of avid birders that are also sportsmen. So, judged from Mr. Colvin's published accounts in 1914, the lesser prairie chicken must be a fine game bird, sufficiently wild and swift of wing to make sporty shooting, and large and plump enough to make a desirable table bird. These birds were wonderfully abundant in the early days, as a few quotations from Mr. Colvin's writings will show. In a cane field near the state line, he says, we saw a flock of 500 or more, and when they arose, it seemed that a hole had been rent in the earth. He wanted to stop and shoot a few, but his companions urged him on, saying, those are only rovers. I'll show you some chickens when we get up in the state. So where they're talking about this is on the Oklahoma border, Morton County border. So again, just barely east of the Baca County, Colorado border. 2 miles further along, we came to Edwards. He informed us that there are a few chickens in a cane and Kaffir cornfield, which is kind of a precursor to Milo, in a cane and calf cornfield a quarter of a mile east. We flushed several birds from the tall bunch grass just before we reached the field, which were promptly dispatched. However, in the field things became more lively. Such a sight I have never seen before nor since. Chickens were flushing everywhere, and droves of 50 to 100 would take down the corn rows, sounding like a moving avalanche as they touched the blades of corn. Still, birds were quite wary, and the only good shots to be had were over a dog. As we thrashed back and forth across the grain fields, the chickens arose in flocks of 50 to 500, and generally 60 to 80 yards distance, making shooting difficult. The majority of the birds, after being flushed, would fly back into the field, while some would go to the bunchgrass covered hills half a mile away. Mr. Ward and I estimated that there were from 3,500 to 4,000 chickens in this one field, a sight never to be forgotten. To put that into perspective, where they're talking about, a good, 3,000 or so birds in this field, the last population estimate that was done, that's maybe 4 or 5 years ago. There was a range-wide estimate. So all the lesser prairie chickens population was put at about 32,000 birds. Right now, I suspect that it's a bit under that. Some precipitation stuff's been good, but we've been losing birds out of some areas. So, 32,000 birds are probably less currently, whereas in a single field, they were talking about, 3,000 birds. Also, in these accounts, this guy Colvin, his brother went out in 1914, and I think that's why this Colvin guy went out there. Was hearing stories from his brother, but his brother went out in Stevens County, the next county over, and in 1904 found a field where they estimated about 15 to 20,000 lesser prairie chickens in a single farm field. So, kind of a crazy, crazy account there. So what happened to the chickens? Well, the first kind of shot across the bow was, prior to a lot of European settlement, was market hunting. And, tens of thousands, if not more, lesser prairie chickens were killed and then loaded up onto train cars, and they were shipped to the eastern seaboard where they're sold on the market, just like so much of Colorado's wildlife and Kansas's wildlife and whatnot. The market hunting knocked down the lesser prairie chickens to some degree, though by all indications, they also was kind of offset by some of these crop fields that were showing up. But still numbers were pretty high when westward expansion occurred. And in the 1863, you had the Homesteading Act, where all of a sudden you had gobs of people coming into western Kansas and eastern Colorado and all the other chicken states, where they all claimed their quarter section of ground, their 160 acres. They would unhook their livestock, the mules or horses or oxen that were pulling their covered wagon. And you went from the system where you had bison that would move through the area and would graze it really heavily. But then you might have, when they did that, excuse me, when they did that, the bison, or excuse me, when the bison would come through, it'd be just like a swath that was heavily disturbed. But then the prairie chickens could move, one way or the other. They'd be able to find the habitat because there was habitat everywhere. And then where it was grazed, the bison, more than likely, didn't come back for several years. It might be 5 years or 8 years or 10 years till they hit that same piece of ground. So you went from a system like that to now all of a sudden on people's quarter section of ground, you have livestock there grazing year round. So in our shortgrass habitat in Colorado, that's where we lost those birds right away. I mean, when you look at the range map, you can see like it actually extended all the way from Kansas to Pueblo in Colorado, where we had lesser prairie chickens. And then you had all the plow outs, conversion to cropland as a part of the Homesteading Act too. And more and more and more crop ground was plowed out to the point where the vast majority of the landscape down here was turned to cropland. And that all culminated then in the Dust Bowl, where you had major drought hitting all of this cropland without any grass, hardly any grass out there to speak of that was left. And the Dust Bowl centered right over, extreme southeast Colorado, like Prowers County, Baca County, southwest Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle, a little bit of the Texas Panhandle. If you look at like where the Lesser Prairie Chicken range is, the drought and the Dust Bowl lined up perfectly right over the Lesser Prairie Chicken range, and so it totally devastated the birds all across the range. Very, very much so in Colorado, to the point where the birds actually became extirpated. They became locally extinct in Colorado, no known prairie chickens from the 30s all the way until 1956. And basically, during the Dust Bowl, the only place that those birds could have to go to was sand sage habitat, because in their sandier country, it was not really possible for people to farm in there, not successfully, anyways. And the sand sage offered some level of habitat that got some birds through that Dust Bowl. Well, you didn't have water developed out in the sand sage, and so you didn't really have much for grazing out there. So it's kind of like no man's land that was just left for the prairie chickens. And so it recovered fairly quickly, and the prairie chicken population then also recovered in that sand sage fairly quickly too, to the point where in the sand sage ecoregion alone, there was estimated 80,000 prairie chickens from the mid 70s to the mid 1980s, where we had a lot of lesser prairie chickens. In fact, everybody else across the range, like in the mixed grass prairie and the sand shinnery ecoregion, they were pointing towards the sand sage ecoregion as that's the best habitat. That's where the birds are. That's what we need to have is sand sage. Well, then we saw in the 80s a big development of center pivot irrigation, where now they're pumping, hitting wells and pumping that water up, be able to farm some of those sandy areas that they couldn't previously farm. And so that caused a big hit for the birds. And then also there was a lot of oil and gas development. So that really, the bird population started going down, made it to about 10,000 birds. And then we had in Colorado this massive blizzard, 06, '07 blizzard. It snowed the last couple of days of 2006. The first 3 days of 2007 put 42 to 48 inches of snow down on the level. We had drifts that were like 20 foot tall. I spent 2.5 months, 7 days a week on snowmobiles that time, that whole time period, feeding pronghorn antelope and deer that were starving to death. So as you can imagine, for a lesser prairie chicken whose food is 3 feet under it and it can't access they didn't do very well. And that really knocked back the chickens in Colorado and then extreme western Kansas. And then on the heels of that, we saw massive, massive drought. And these animals, need grass to grow to have nesting habitat. They need forbs to grow to make bugs for the chicks to be able to eat the bugs and survive. And we had 3 years of record-setting drought where it actually was drier. So 2011 to 2013 was drier than it was any time during the Dust Bowl. And so we came out on the back end of that with much lower numbers. In fact, in 2016, we bottomed out at 25 males that we are aware of in the entire state of Colorado. And in the Sand Sage ecoregion as a whole, we're down to probably less than 200 birds. So, yeah, pretty kind of depressing story where we got there. Here, this picture kind of shows more of our current situation as well as some of the things I talked about in the past. So here in the purple, this is the estimated occupied range for a portion of the Sand Sage ecoregion. So this is going to be basically the sandy soil, the sandy area there south of. Let me get a marker here. Um, so you have this sandy band of sandy soil south of the Arkansas River. And here in the black dots, that's all the black dots are oil and gas wells. The blue dots are historical leks. I don't have all the historical leks for Kansas, so there should be probably a few more blue dots on here. And then yellow is the active leks, and these are leks where I found prairie chickens on here this spring. I do quite a bit of surveying in Kansas, just because that area doesn't get surveyed by Kansas Wildlife Park. So I partner with them and I survey a whole bunch of ground. But basically, currently, probably about 600 birds in the Sand Sage ecoregion. The vast majority of them are stacked right here on the Colorado-Kansas border. I counted over 200 males just right here within 7 miles of the Colorado-Kansas border. So you can see, it shouldn't be lost on you where the oil and gas wells are, that's where the lesser prairie chickens kind of end. This area off to the east that kind of looks like a hand. This is an area where two big names in the prairie chicken world, Jim Pittman and Christian Hagen, they did all of their PhD work back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And in an area where they actually put transmitters on it, they caught and put transmitters on about 400 prairie chicken hens, which is an incredible feat. This is a very big research project. There were lots and lots of birds in that area. These birds are all gone. They're probably for about 10 years or better. There have been no documented lesser prairie chickens in this area. So again, we're really just looking at a few scattered leks in Colorado, and then the bulk of the leks here, and then just a small handful of leks down there by Morton County, Kansas. So we talked about some of the challenges in the past. Let's talk about challenges, current challenges. Um, in Colorado, so after the Dust Bowl, for a long time, all of our birds were living in sand sage habitat, which is native sand sage rangeland. In the mid 1980s, there's a government program called the Conservation Reserve Program that hit the scenes where farmers were paid to set aside crop ground and put it into grass for a period of time. So they would enroll into 10-year contracts. So you had a massive amount in southeast Colorado and southwest Kansas, a massive amount of crop ground into the CRP program. In fact, counties like Prowers County and Baca County actually had about a quarter of their overall farm ground go into grass. So in Baca County, there was about 280,000 acres that went into CRP. Well, in some areas, this ended up being a big boon for chickens because now you had reestablished grasslands in an area. Now, prairie chickens are not very good pioneers, but they were getting reestablished in some of these grassland areas. And so, um, in that shortgrass CRP ecoregion that was on that earlier map that I showed you, so that's mostly up in Kansas. That's actually, this is a story that kind of gives me some hope in that up in Kansas there, the shortgrass CRP region had no birds to speak of in like the 70s. You know, if you look at historic range maps, nobody, Kansas Wildlife and Parks or landowners, nobody's aware of any prairie chickens up there. And the very end of the 1970s and early 1980s, they started seeing a few prairie chickens up there in some of their shortgrass habitat where it's like not like a lot of our Colorado shortgrass, it's like a pool table tall. Like a lot of their stuff was more like mid shin high tall. Um, and this area in the mid 1980s, when they added CRP to the system, now all of a sudden you added a whole bunch of good perpetual, or excuse me, good nesting habitat that was there year in, year out. Most CRP historically hasn't been grazed, and so that grass is there and dependable for the chickens. That made all the difference in the world. And you went from a place where back in the early 80s there was next to nothing for chickens, and then by the mid 1990s the highest densities of lesser prairie chickens anywhere in the range could be found. And so really, really impressive, really, really important area. Now, part of the problem is, though, let me just step back and just mention in Prowers County, Colorado, we were seeing the same thing. We actually in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were seeing exponential growth. Now, why is this all important? Well, um, in Colorado, since 2018, we haven't had any leks in our rangeland due to how the land is managed and grazed and drought and some other factors. We've lost all of our birds in the rangeland. And the only places where there's kind of that consistent nesting habitat provided year in, year out has been in CRP in Colorado. Well, the problem is CRP is all dependent on a government program, right? And so, as the government changes the way that they're handling different programs and different policies and all that kind of stuff, that changes the habitat. And so, the 2018 Farm Bill, so the Farm Bill drives basically what happens with CRP, and the 2018 Farm Bill really caused a big shift in CRP. A couple things happened. One, it reduced the payments these landowners make, so landowners getting their annual payments are making less than they were 30 years ago. As you can imagine, that's not going to work in today's day and age, and so a lot of landowners have been plying the ground out. Take a state like Kansas, a big CRP state, they've lost about half of their CRP just in the last 3, 4 years. Additionally, the 2018 Farm Bill has allowed for a lot of grazing, which historically wasn't a part of the program. So they can do emergency grazing, and if you hit D2 drought or worse in any calendar year. And the reality is here in extreme southeast Colorado, we hit D2 drought about every single year sometime in our wettest years. Like this is a beautiful, wonderful year, good moisture. But for 2, 3 days in Baca County, we hit D2 drought, so they were given the thumbs up for emergency hanging and grazing there. And so, unfortunately, there's a lot of places where I found a lot of prairie chicken leks that now when I go out there in the spring, it looks like the picture on the right versus the picture on the left where that pole is, that's actually a prairie chicken nest that's marked there. So this is a big, big deal. And so when you have an ecoregion like the shortgrass CRP ecoregion that's depending on CRP, when that program changes in a big way, that's going to just crush that population. And of the 32,000 lesser prairie chickens that exist today, 25,000 of those birds are in the sand or in the shortgrass CRP ecoregion. So this is kind of building your house on the sand. This is not a stable foundation to have a population depend on. Then another challenge that these birds are facing, especially here in Colorado, is our energy development with renewables. So lesser prairie chickens are a bird of the southern Great Plains. And the southern Great Plains, historically, you don't have a lot of tall structures on the land, or excuse me, you don't have trees on the landscape. There's kind of far and few between, really just limited to riparian areas. So these birds didn't really grow up around trees, but where there were trees, somehow it became hardwired into their DNA and into their instincts to avoid trees because trees represent raptors and danger. And so these prairie chickens avoid trees like the plague, and lesser prairie chickens avoid any tall structures that resemble trees. And so, like a big windmill or a transmission line an oil and gas well might be enough to have those birds completely avoid an area. As you saw the map earlier that was showing the wells and prairie chickens kind of avoiding that. Additionally, not only do you have the tall structures on the landscape, you have the pump jacks out there making big sounds, pump, pump, pop, pop, pop all the time. And that is something that's just going to make those birds completely disappear. These birds really like large tracts of intact grasslands. And when you start to minimize that the amount of grass they have, or you put disturbances out there that it's going to cause those birds to totally vacate the area. When you're a lekking species, you're depending on the females hearing you. You're not going to set up shop right next to a pump jack that's making a whole bunch of sound, or a wind tower that's making a whole bunch of sound, or something that's going to represent danger. Prairie chicken hens especially avoid these tall structures. Currently in Colorado, we have somewhere between 14, and it's changing all the time, about 14 to 16 wind projects that are either currently being built or planned to be built in Lesser Prairie-Chicken range. Right now, every single lek that we have in the state, except for one, is planned to have development on it. And this year, we've come up definitely a fair little bit from the 25 bird males that we were at in 2016. I think we counted 84 males this year. But the reality is here in the eco region, we're one big blizzard or a multi-year drought away from losing these birds. So what are we doing? Historically in Colorado, we've been working on, I've been working on lesser prairie chickens, on habitat and whatnot for my whole career. But, resources have been limited, and we've got resources. Basically, what we've done is generally we've scattered out the work that we do. Our birds are scattered over a pretty broad area. As there comes up opportunity to do some crop to grass conversion work where we can put some CRP in, or through our own lesser prairie chicken habitat program, we're trying to get more grass next to where there's currently active leks. But the reality is we're spreading what's already pretty limited resources pretty far and wide. So fortunately, there's gotten to be just a lot more support in recent years, both with our agency and with partners, and there's just a lot more interest in lesser prairie chicken conservation work. And we definitely need more partners, and we need more help and more support. But we've really realized that we need to put most of our eggs into fewer baskets. And so one of the things we've done is actually identified some priority areas, with one priority area kind of above, all else being this, we're calling it the sand sage generational grassland. Basically, the Nature Conservancy had identified in the shortgrass ecoregion a sand sage generational grassland, and then the mixed grass ecoregion a generational grassland. And so I worked with them, and I mapped this out of a sand sage generational grassland, and now this has been adopted by Kansas Wildlife and Parks and the Nature Conservancy and others. But basically what this is a priority area in this blue boundary. It's a priority area where we're focusing our conservation efforts. Again, this is where the bulk of the birds are in the sand sage ecoregion. And so it makes the most sense right now for us to focus our efforts. But within this generational grassland, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a couple of strongholds. The definition of a stronghold being at least about 50,000 acres or more of land that is set aside for prairie chickens, where the primary management goal for that land is prairie chicken management and habitat management for prairie chickens. And when I say set aside, I mean either like a conservation easement that's perpetual, or fee title purchase, where let's say Colorado Parks and Wildlife or Southern Plains Land Trust or Pheasants Forever were to own the land. So what we're trying to do is build a 50,000 acre stronghold on the Kansas side of the border and a 50,000 acre stronghold on the Colorado side of the border. Currently in Colorado, we have this Tate Ranch, or excuse me, in Kansas, we have the Tate Ranch here that is 32,000 acres in size. And right now, about 85% of the birds in the ecoregion are depending on the Tate Ranch. In Colorado, we've got a couple of conservation easements here. One from the Nature Conservancy holds, and then one that Colorado Parks and Wildlife holds. Unfortunately, this one right here on the board, or both of them, they don't have any stipulations in the easement language as that are tie it to any kind of management. There's no restrictions on how much it's grazed or anything like that. So they're protected from development, which has become a really important thing, because all this area around that easement recently has been plowed out, and this is still happening. We're seeing conversion of native grasslands going into farm ground. In 2014, within days of the lesser prairie chicken being listed, the first time it was listed as a threatened species, a whole, it's like 74 irrigated circles got put into uh, prairie chicken country there. But here on this conservation easement, unfortunately, we had is pretty heavily grazed. Historically, it hadn't been. You see a lot of red dots in that area. There historically were a lot of prairie chickens in there. And some of those prairie chicken leks actually we recorded as being active for over 50 years. In 1956, after the Dust Bowl, it's the first time we had prairie chickens show up back in Colorado, and they showed up on this lek that got dubbed, Prowers One. We have every one of our leks is numbered and named. And so Prowers 1 was active all the way from 1956 to the 06-07 blizzard, and the blizzard wiped it out. Then we had a whole bunch of the habitat get plowed up around there, and then land ownership changed, and that ground was really heavily grazed, so no chance of prairie chickens being in there. But recently, we've gotten a contract with the current landowner, and we're paying for grazing deferment there, where it's not getting grazed for 6 years. We're 2 years into that. And what was really exciting is after one single year of that ground not being grazed, prairie chickens moved back in there, and actually Prowers won that lek back in 1956 that got established, then blinked out in '07, is active again, and we have birds on it again. So that's pretty exciting, and another thing that kind of gives hope here. Additionally, I don't know whether it's going to happen or not. We have, some ground we're trying to purchase, and there's some other things going on with conservation partners that there's some hopes of some land acquisition there, and we're going to continue pursuing this. Again, trying to build strongholds there. Now, one way in which Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and very much myself, and I have a crew of folks that work for me, a lot of what we focus on is crop to grass conversion, trying to put a lot of grass out there. For instance, the my guys are out drilling grass today at the Sand Creek Massacre site, where we're drilling a 600-acre field that's going to be in grass in perpetuity, where the National Park Service purchased a whole bunch of farm ground, and we're helping them to put it into grasslands for prairie chickens. And so there's a lot of this work that we're doing. We've kind of built this habitat program from the ground up. It used to be the beg, borrow, steal program, and bit by bit, I've gotten tractors and drills and stuff, and now we're trying to get bigger tractors and bigger drills, and trying to actually get to the goal of converting about 8 to 10,000 acres per year, which is would be a pretty big deal if we're able to kind of start pulling that off. But this is a big part of what we do for prairie chicken conservation, is taking what you see there in the left and turning it to what you see there in the right. And that's where my greatest passion is doing that very work, because that's where I see the greatest uplift, not only for lesser prairie chicken, but all the other grassland bird species that really like that kind of mixed grass type habitat. So there's a lot of other passerines that are we're doing them a big solid, when right now we're seeing so much CRP plow out. We have a lot of species like lark buntings and grasshopper sparrows, for instance, that are really kind of struggling in a lot of these areas where they're losing quite a bit of their habitat with the CRP plowouts. So that's kind of in a nutshell, some of the things we're working on now. One of the questions that I often get is, well, why don't you just like move the birds? How about a translocation? So I figured you guys might be interested in that. So I just want to tell you a little bit about a translocation project that we did, where we moved lesser prairie chickens from the shortgrass ecoregion down to the sand sage ecoregion on the Comanche National Grasslands and the Cimarron National Grasslands. This was a partnership between Kansas Wildlife and Parks, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and then Kansas State University. So again, we took these birds from the shortgrass CRP ecoregion up here, and then we moved them down into sand sage on the Comanche and Cimarron National Grasslands. We had two release areas. They were about 47 miles apart. We conducted this project. We started in 2016 and we wrapped it up in 2019. But when we were considering this, there had been some translocations that were done in the past, and none of them had been deemed to be successful. I think Texas has done a little bit of work, but Colorado Division of Wildlife back in the day had done most of the translocation work before this project, and the biggest project that had been done was actually capturing birds in the Garden City, Kansas area, and on the Comanche grasslands, and they were moved to the Pueblo test track site, trying to get a population established right by Pueblo. Unfortunately, when those birds were released, I don't think they probably had airplanes up to track those birds. And we learned on our translocation project that you really have to have airplanes to track the birds. You're going to lose them. And so they probably didn't release enough birds to begin with. And the birds that they released, some of them had transmitters, some of them didn't, but they pretty well lost all those birds. And they never saw any leks get established in the areas. They had one hen raise one single brood. But one of the things I want to mention about this is a potential problem as we're considering doing this translocation project was all those birds received bands, or they had bands on their legs. And there was a lesser prairie chicken hunter near Garden City, Kansas, that 1 year after the translocation project, there at the Pueblo Test Track site, he harvested a prairie chicken right where it had been captured over 200 miles away. So at least one bird made it all the way back to the lek where it had been captured. And we knew this going into our more modern day, project that we were doing. And that's kind of a thing of concern. You don't want to go through a whole bunch of effort and expense and threat to the birds or whatnot by handling them and capturing them just to have them all go back. So we didn't know what they were going to do. So basically, all this capture work was done in the shortgrass ecoregion in CRP and some shortgrass. Our home base was Scott Lake State Park, where we had a crew of a good 20 people. I'd give them their marching orders every day. We'd spread out all across the landscape. Everybody was getting up at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and you drive an hour and a half to your prairie chicken lek, where we were capturing these birds, slapping transmitters on them, not slapping, putting transmitters on them, and then we had to take the birds down. They got inspected by veterinarians before they came to Colorado, and they got released on the Comanche and the Cimarron. It was a massive, massive effort, and we moved 411 birds over 3 springs and one fall. Sorry, I'm going to go back here to this slide. What this is, just to orient yourself, is this is the Colorado Oklahoma border, Kansas Oklahoma border. Here's the Kansas Colorado border. Elkhart, Kansas, Campo, Colorado is right here. Comanche grasslands is kind of in the dark green here. Here's the Cimarron grasslands over here. I'm going to get this started, and what you will see is every color is a different prairie chicken, and you'll start to see the movements of those birds. And I'll kind of talk about what you're seeing what, as it's playing, if it's going to start playing here. There we go. So we would release these birds at these sites. So when we started the project in Baca County, Colorado, that we were down to one single lek with two males on it. In Morton County, remember I talked about Morton County and Stevens County used to be the epicenter of lesser prairie chicken country, and they were down to one single lek with five males on it when we started this project. So we released the birds at those leks. Colorado, we actually lost our birds, our native two birds that were there. They weren't there when we started doing releases. We released those birds, and then what would happen is the hens would all freak out and they would travel long distances. So you can see like some of those birds made it all the way up to the Arkansas River and made it all the way back down. You had birds make it down all the way to Texas and back. And so these hens would spend about 3 weeks just going crazy, traveling around, kind of mapping out the landscape. And then they would come back either to where they were released or to where they found a lek somewhere along the way. And you see that the locations aren't moving much. That's because the hens are nesting. And every once in a while, you'll see one of those dots will move a long distance, and that's because they lost their nest there. But basically, we had really high nest initiation. The birds did really well. It just took them about 3 weeks of kind of mapping out the landscape before they settled down and nested. So our nesting period was about 3 weeks to a month after what they would have been doing naturally where they had come from. Here's another example of just some of the bird movements there. Like I said, we had one bird that made it down to the Texas Panhandle. We had at one point in time, I had a prairie chicken that went far enough west that it was within half a mile of a bighorn sheep that I had a collar on. So I had a transmitter prairie chicken and a bighorn sheep within just a half a mile of each other. Again, we had some birds make it all the way up to the Arkansas River and back. We had birds released in Kansas, go 40 some odd miles to Colorado to that release site and nest, and vice versa. So a lot of big movement, some pretty interesting stuff. Now, what do they actually do as far as habitat and all that kind of stuff? We were trying to get them reestablished in the sand sage habitat on the Comanche and the Cimarron National Grasslands. So the sand sage, like you see down there in the picture to the left, unfortunately, these birds decided they didn't want to do that. They instead sought out habitat just like the habitat they grew up in. And so they went to habitat more like the habitat in the picture to the right there. Um, we were capturing them out of CRP and shortgrass prairie that was kind of a lot taller, again, taller grass than what we see in a lot of Colorado shortgrass. Those prairie chickens, they need mid shin high to mid thigh high grasses. So these birds bailed out and they ended up moving mostly to the north at the end of the day into CRP. And so they didn't actually get the leks established on the national grasslands. We had a couple leks definitely established on the national grasslands, but the majority ended up in the CRP 1 year after we were done with the project. So this would have been we hadn't released the birds for a year. We had 20 leks that were established from the project with I think 115 males. So let's say a population of 250 some odd birds that got established from the project. So at the end of the day, that's really successful. If somebody told me at the front end that for every two birds that you move, one is actually going to get established in a population, I would have been ecstatic because these birds are getting moved to an entirely different landscape. Additionally, everything wants to eat a prairie chicken. There's lots of predators and all that kind of stuff. They're not that long lived. So overall, saw some pretty massive success there on the project. But we were not successful at getting a whole bunch of leks established on the grasslands, unfortunately. But we brought a lot of birds back to Baca County and to Morton County. And to this day, the only reason we still have lesser prairie chickens there is because of the translocation project. Unfortunately, we had really nasty drought on the heels of the project. So we got really good production of birds. Again, that, 1 year later when we saw those 20 leks that were active, 115 males, almost all those males were birds that were raised in those areas. So they were successfully hatched. They were second or third generation from the birds that we had moved. Things were looking really good. And then we had 2 years where the driest place in all of Colorado was Baca County, and the driest place in all of Kansas was Morton County, right over our project area. And again, drought is lesser prairie chickens, one of their greatest nemesis. So, unfortunately, we really dropped down on numbers with that. We still have birds in both of those counties because of the translocation project, but I don't know. There's a reasonable chance that a few years from now we may have lost the birds completely out of Baca County and completely out of Morton County. So what now? I mean, a lot of what I was talking about was, kind of like doom and gloom. I mean, that's just the reality of lesser prairie chickens. Like the story has not looked good. When I first started working on lesser prairie chickens, I was adamantly opposed to the bird being listed as a threatened species because I thought, what risk really is there of them becoming extinct? I thought there's no way they could become extinct. The longer that I work on this bird, the more that I realize we absolutely are headed that direction unless we take some pretty significant action. And that's where really this whole stronghold concept becomes so important because in order to save what we have to build a really stable foundation. So it becomes really, really important that we build these 50,000 plus acre blocks of habitat that are managed well for prairie chickens. If we could do that, then through other programs and other things, we can build off of that and we can try to get birds back into some other areas. But currently, right now, we got to do everything we can to save the birds where we have them, especially where most of them are. So, with that being said, at the end of the day, I don't know if any of you are, uh, incredibly wealthy or know any really incredibly wealthy people that want to buy some prairie chicken land. You can come down, I'll put you on a prairie chicken lek and be happy to introduce you. Or if anybody has any ideas as far as fundraising or anything else, we have a lot of partners that have stepped up in a big way to try to help out with the stronghold effort in a lot of different ways. And so definitely always happy to have some other people on the team. We definitely need help wherever we can get it. With that being said, for anybody that like legitimately is trying to do some prairie chicken conservation work and has some good ideas and is part of the team there, I'll do what I can to get that person on a lek and show them prairie chickens, help them to understand what the prairie chicken situation is down here. So if that applies to any of you, if you really want to do some prairie chicken work and you have some ideas and anything like that, let's talk about it. Might be able to get you on a lek. One of the questions that often gets asked is, where do I go to see prairie chickens? I know you guys, that's probably one of the main questions that you guys are wondering right now. Well, unfortunately, there really is no good opportunity in Colorado. We don't have very many leks, and honestly, we want to minimize the impact to those leks. With that being said, that Kansas shortgrass CRP ecoregion really is the place to go. Honestly, you could drive county roads in Lane County, Logan County, Ness County, Eastern Scott County, and just find CRP, and you can find prairie chickens off the county roads. That's how we found most of the prairie chicken leks for our translocation project was going out there and just searching for them off the county roads. Additionally, I think the Oakley Chamber of Commerce in Oakley, Kansas, they actually have some prairie chicken viewing that they do on the Hamey Ranch and then on the Nature Conservancy Smoky Valley Ranch. So there are some opportunities there to see chickens in Kansas. There used to be a public viewing lek in Campo, Colorado. Hasn't been chickens there for forever, and so there's no lesser prairie chicken viewing allowed on the Comanche. The Cimarron Grasslands, no chickens there on their public viewing blind for a long time. Used to be a prairie chicken festival in Milnesan, New Mexico. Due to how those birds are doing, that's not going on anymore. Several states had festivals and a lot of public viewing, and those have all disappeared because the bird numbers in a lot of cases the birds just don't exist there anymore, or the bird numbers are so low that they really can't offer those public viewing opportunities. So again, the situation is really dire, but like I said, there's a lot more support in with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and funding sources and with partners to try to hit this stronghold, whole concept pretty hard. And like I said, I'm pretty excited. The last couple of years, we've made some pretty big strides towards that, and we'll see what we can do here in the future. But with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to questions and see if you guys have any questions for me.
First, bravo. Great. Very. I felt like I was in a briefing. Like I felt like this is where I'm in the room where it happens.
Yeah, well, this is the room where it happens. So,
Oh, well, hey, look at that.
yeah,
Wow, very immersive. Very, very immersive. And you got some claps in the chat. Thank you for folks. We're starting to see some questions come in. First one's from Ajit. Why translocation?
that's a great question. So, ultimately, I mean, if we could avoid translocation or whatnot, that would be the best thing to do. But in some cases, if the habitat is really there, translocation may be the tool. Again, Colorado completely lost its birds in the 30s, and we've really only had birds since the late 50s. They're not good pioneers, and so it takes a long time for them to find habitats. And so Colorado, what we have kind of in spades, or to a much greater degree than these other states do, are these large, relatively intact tracts of prairie chicken habitat. Like the Big Sandy, for instance. I mean, 700,000 acres of prairie chicken habitat right there, or the stuff down on the Comanche. The thing is you need land that's going to be managed properly for the chicken. So if we have areas we've completely lost the birds, but if we can start managing, figure out ways to find incentive payments to landowners. There's a lot of landowners out there that would love to be able to manage their land differently, but it doesn't pencil out for them. We got to figure out ways to pay for the ecosystem service of providing prairie chicken habitat. And so that's one of the biggest nuts we're trying to crack right now and trying to figure out how to do this is trying to figure out funding and the fair market value to pay for lesser prairie chicken nesting habitat. If we do that and we invest all that in there, then it may make sense to try to do translocation to get birds from an area where there's a lot of birds and then move them to a place where there are no birds or very few birds. So the problem also though becomes, where birds are increasingly, disappearing from various areas or whatnot, where there are good numbers of birds, like the state of Kansas is really going to be the only source of lesser prairie chickens for a translocation project. There's a lot of politics at play to even be able to get permission to go trap birds in that state. And so I don't know if it's even a possibility. That's where if we can build a stronghold and get birds within Colorado established, we may end up having our own source population that we can take them down to Baca County, to the Comanche grasslands. We can get them up onto the Big Sandy to conservation easements that we have in place or whatnot. So you have to look at this as the long game. We talk about stronghold building, which is like we're buying land, fee title purchase, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of what we're working on too is like a state-run CRP program where we would be paying landowners to have their cropland go to grass as well. And so we do a fair bit of that work. We got to hit it on the short term and the long term and the medium term and everywhere. Hit all fronts to be able to make this whole thing work.
Makes a lot of sense. We have another question from Jason. Can you share your email with us to follow up with your conservation ideas?
Yeah, sure. My email is my first name, Jonathan .reitz @state.co.us. Fair warning though, it is possible you might not get a response in that yeah, when I'm running 16 to 18-hour days, there's a lot of email triage that goes on. I'm missing a lot of emails right now. So you may just, if you don't get a response, just email me back or just harass me, and I'll eventually get back to you. But I'll put that on you to keep harassing me until you're back.
And that is what this system requires, persistence, as
Yes.
we have seen that with the prairie chicken. We have another question here from Henry. Have invasive species like cheatgrass affected conservation efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So cheatgrass is a major issue for prairie grouse across a lot of, for a lot of different species. Like for our greater chickens up in northeast Colorado, big problem, for sage grouse, for instance. But here in southeast Colorado and in the southern Great Plains, we really are not a cool season precipitation driven system. It's a lot more warm season and a lot more monsoonal moisture driven. And so we really don't struggle with like invasive or some of your less desirable cool season plants. So cheatgrass really isn't a problem for us at all, thank goodness. You see it a little bit in the bar ditches, but you don't really get it out in the fields much. Smooth brome, there's a lot of areas where like good bunch grasses get taken over by smooth brome. We don't have to worry about that. That's an excellent question, but yeah, thank goodness we got enough problems down here. It's good that we don't have to deal with that one.
Um, Thank you so much for that. I have a couple questions. I am curious, building kind of off where Henry's coming from. How have other threats presented themselves to the prairie chicken? I would like to know, how those threats maybe through time have changed, as you talked about habitat changes related to, public policy. But is there anything recent that you can point to that's a threat that maybe wasn't a while ago?
Yeah, I mean the policy deal is a big deal. I mean, it's a huge blow to, basically what we were looking at, with all of this energy development
Mhm.
was massive hit to our prairie chickens and potentially the nail in the coffin for Colorado's chickens. Though the silver lining, and it was a huge silver lining, was those impacts when the bird was listed needed to be mitigated. So for every 1 acre that's impacted, you would have 2 acres that's offset. One of those acres would be a conservation acre. So you go in and you place a conservation easement on something that already is prairie chicken habitat. And then the other acre was a restoration acre where you go into cropland and turn it to grass. So we were actually going to see, I'm working with mitigation bankers where we're looking at about 30,000 acres of perpetually protected and well managed land in this stronghold, in this, Prowers County area alone. That's pretty exciting. The impacts are not exciting, but the fact that we actually get to build something that would be protected in perpetuity for the birds, that's awesome. That's a huge uplift. But then all of a
And
sudden, with the delisting, that mitigation market crashed. So now we're seeing the impacts from the development, but we're not going to have those offsets. So right now, the biggest thing is a lot of policy and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with the Endangered Species Act and the current administration and all that. As far as other threats, I mean, really like again, like I can't hit on the CRP one enough. We've been depending on, I mean, I'd say easily 3/4 of our prairie chickens that exist, lesser prairie chickens that exist anymore, are dependent on CRP. And that program has changed so much in the last few years. And we're up for another farm bill, and chances are is they're probably going to cut funding. We just don't know where that's going to go. So that's really a big one.
Yeah.
There's other threats across the range that luckily we don't have to deal with. Like in the mixed grass ecoregion, one of the big threats that they deal with is invasion of eastern red cedars, where trees are taking over their grasslands. And so there's a lot of different things, and the problems are different in every different area. But
Mhm.
we kind of talked about the primary ones here in Colorado.
Thank you for that. And it seems like when you look under the hood of the wildlife conservation mobile, let's say, there's a lot of finance at play. Is wildlife conservation for free?
Wildlife conservation is not for free, and I think there's a lot of folks out there that are really trying to shine a spotlight on the fact that like there's a lot of benefits that a lot of these grasslands or private lands offer to society as a whole. Whether clean air and clean water and wildlife and all that kind of stuff, and landowners, the people that own that land or whatnot, are not compensated for any of that. And the reality is if we want those lands managed in a way that's gonna, improve things for some of the wildlife species, we got to figure out ways to pay for it. And currently, we're pretty limited on options.
Yeah, and before we get or part of that, but before I have another follow-up question, we have one from NZ, could be New Zealand. Great to have an international caller. What is the current price for CRP payment per acre?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it varies a lot depending on what county you're at, what state you're at. Basically, the further east you go, you get more precipitation, and more precipitation means better farm ground, so that means a higher rental rate. But in like our generational grassland area here in Prowers County, um, you're talking, $18 an acre per year up to about $32 per acre per year. One of the big hits with CRP that I didn't talk about is there's general CRP, crop to grass conversion, but there's also grassland CRP where landowners that have rangeland receive $18 per acre per year. And basically, all they're getting paid for is to have a conservation easement on their ground for about 10 years. So they basically are getting money for nothing because there's not a massive, massive threat for plow out. But if they want to plow it out, all they got to do is cancel their contract and then they plow it out. If they want to put wind in there, they literally just carve out the footprint of where that wind tower is going to go, and the rest of it stays in grassland CRP. So what's happened is you have, grassland CRP that's, costs $18 an acre, and maybe some of your general cost $30 per acre. Well, the federal government's able to pay for a lot more acres with less dollars, and it ends up being window dressing because it's like, oh, look
Mm,
what we did with CRP. We're covering so many more acres with less money. Well, at the end of the day, that's a big difference when you just take rangeland that there's no uplift on whatsoever. They don't change anything as far as grazing. That's totally different than when you take cropland and set it aside as grassland, right? So
mm.
that's just another big hit that we've taken with the CRP program is that grassland CRP.
Thank you so much for that. There were some things that you mentioned really quickly as like reference material that if this was a Wikipedia article would be highlighted blue. I wanted to ask about one of those.
Sure.
You mentioned the chicken getting delisted. Could you describe what that means a little more for our audience?
Yeah. So basically, there was two court rulings that have occurred this year. One was this last spring, I think, like maybe in it's either March or May,
And
where
that's Supreme Court.
basically, yeah. So this is yep. So this is federal court where you had one lawsuit that was oil and gas industry against the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There was another court case that was actually some of the prairie chicken states, so Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, I believe, that they, in partnership with some like folks from the Permian Basin and some oil and gas industry, sued the Fish and Wildlife Service. A lot of these states don't want the listing because it's perceived as really impacting. And it does. It makes it more expensive to develop in a lot of these areas, like we talked about, some of that mitigation that's required and everything else. Additionally, there's a lot of, with the listing, a lot of fear that is not based in reality, where most folks aren't impacted whatsoever. Ranchers, farmers, they're all covered. But basically, what happened is this last spring, the first court ruling vacated the 4D rule, which is the part of the Endangered Species Act that kind of gives common sense to it. So if basically the Endangered Species Act all kind of if you distill it down, it basically comes to this idea of take. It is illegal to take this threatened species or this endangered species, taking being actually killing the animal or destroying its habitat. Well, technically, if let's say you got a rancher that has sand sage rangeland out there and you were to, he wants to put in a fence, a barbed wire fence. Well, normally you would go and you'd mow the sagebrush out there and then put your fence so the sagebrush is out of the way. Well, that would be ridiculous for that to be illegal, but technically that'd be illegal because they would be, destroying the habitat. Well, there are basically the 4D rule has a whole bunch of it allows all these approvals where the Fish and Wildlife Service gives, NRCS or the Farm Service Agency approvals or groups of landowners approvals or whatnot that covers farmers and ranchers and a lot of other people on what they do. So it would not be an issue to mow the sagebrush or, in some cases to plow out CRP. That was not an issue. And that sounds counterintuitive because why would it be okay to not plow out CRP? The reality is if landowners can't plow out CRP, nobody will ever enroll into the CRP program because you take cropland and you turn it then into permanent rangeland and you devalue that land by about half. So basically, the 4D rule is really, really important. And ultimately, it's kind of what gives that bird protections. Well, that 4D rule was vacated. And then later on here at the tail end of the summer, they had another ruling with another case down there at the federal court down in Texas that basically completely vacated the listing where the lesser chicken is no longer listed. So I can't say, there's justifications for that on, having to do with this, how the populations were determined, this northern distinct population segment versus a southern distinct population segment, and it gets a little convoluted and whatnot. But basically, long story short, it was all in the courts. Additionally, there was a senator in Kansas that he was pushing forward a bill to try to get the lesser prairie chicken delisted. That happened a year ago too, and the Biden administration ended up vetoing that bill. But this year, this summer, they were trying it again, and that actually would have required that, or it stated in the bill that the lesser prairie chicken could never be listed as a threatened or endangered species again. So it's like the Endangered Species Act would cover all species except the lesser prairie chicken. But basically, when you have these court rulings, I believe that bill died. I don't think it went forward, and ultimately, it would have had to have like a supermajority in the Senate in order to get approved. So. I don't, that one went away, but ultimately, yeah, just because of these court rulings, the bird is delisted for the time being, and more than likely, it's probably not going to be until another administration for the bird to get listed again.
Well, isn't that legislatively crafty, huh? You can just say, hey, we know that this law has existed for almost 50 years?
Yeah,
Uh, more than 50. Um, we can just pass a law to say, yeah, the concepts of the Endangered Species Act may exist, but acting as the legislature, we're going to just exclude this species. Just
yeah,
FYI. Like
yeah.
that doesn't really follow a train of thought on
Yeah, like I said, none of this
wildlife
has
conservation,
anything to
or much
do with
less how to
biology
respond
or
to endangered species.
yeah, the population, the biology, none of that really mattered on the decisions or whatnot, and it's all just yeah, it doesn't make any sense, but here we are. So
No, it does not. We have another question from Ajit, and thank you, Marty. Feeling the same way. Could CFO have a program to have its members volunteer to pay for an acre each per person for 10 years? So, doing the math real quick, and this is the back of the napkin. We got $180 to $300. Would it work? Ajit's trying to start a movement, and I'm
sure.
following.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I mean, yes. I mean that it all depends
Well,
on how many
speaking for
people, right?
CFO.
Right. I mean, it all depends on how many people throw in and all that kind of stuff, right? I will say, as far as like, you know, larger scale money it takes to do any kind of land acquisition or anything longer term contract wise. Also, like if you're running money through a program, you need to have a certain amount or hit a certain level that it makes it worthwhile for the shenanigans that have to go on in the government to transfer funds to do something. But we have like currently, for instance, we have a some disking work where we're disking up CRP to improve it. Where we have prairie chickens, I've done a lot of research on this, and it's very very successful. Really gives that CRP an uplift, and is the best thing to do for contract management for CRP in most cases. Well, CPW funding, we can pay a certain amount per acre to a contractor to do that. But now the going rate is a little higher than that. So we have Pheasants Forever, for instance. Donors came in and they're paying for a little bit extra on top to the person that's doing the contracting to go ahead and do that disking. I've got other folks that like for us to scale up to purchase equipment. It's a lot easier for me to get grass seed or to do some of these programmatic things than it is to get equipment and equipment that we desperately need to be able to do a lot of this work, to plant grass, to disc grass and interseed better grasses and all that kind of stuff. And so, we've got a couple of partners or individuals that are donating money to kind of help out with a tractor purchase or something where like little amounts of money really can add up and make a big difference. And it's a little easier to kind of handle. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to try to help that way. But yeah, to help get involved in one of these programs or something, we probably need a bigger pot, a fairly substantial pot of money to make it worthwhile of transferring it. There's some other ways that might make a little bit more sense otherwise. So
How lucrative. And Linda, I believe you wanted to add something
Oh,
from
no,
CFO.
keep going.
Oh, okay, just for the CFO perspective. And a immediate follow-up from Ajit. How much is a tractor?
the tractor that I need a 200 horse tractor because we're trying to pull much bigger equipment, 30-foot grass drill. I've been able to get some grant funding and some Nature Conservancy funding for a 30-foot grass drill. I don't have a tractor to pull it. A tractor to pull it is about $220,000.
Just $220,000
Just $220,000, no big deal.
Just a clean $220,000. We can find it.
Hell yeah.
Now,
Sounds good to me.
speaking of finding money,
Yeah.
Colorado finds itself in a budget deficit era. And that isn't helped by the derelictions and backsliding from the federal government. How much could in the scope of the finance of wildlife conservation, how much can you describe the impacts that federal changes have made to the way, your job
As
has
far
been
as on
done?
the finance side of things. Yeah, that's a really good question. So definitely we're seeing the impacts, though most of Colorado Parks and Wildlife's funding comes from license sales, mostly from selling hunting licenses, especially elk hunting licenses. So we don't receive like state taxes. And so we're not, the state deficit and issue there isn't impacting us as much. And then also because of our status with Pittman Robertson dollars. We received an excise tax on the sale of sporting goods and hunting and fishing gear. Um, we would lose that if like the state were to take some of our game cash money. So that protects our game cash money from being taken to be used for other things within state government. So we are fairly protected from that. And so we're in a different situation than a lot of other state government, but there's a lot of other roundabout ways where it's definitely having an impact. And things are not nearly as rosy now as they were a year ago for sure. So uh,
I know that's
definitely
right.
seeing a trickle down effect, but maybe we're not getting hit near as much as like a lot of our federal partners and even state partners in other
Mhm.
agencies within the state.
And you did a really good job as well at providing a really good light into the day-to-day aspects of a wildlife biologist. Knowing that you're at the state level, is it safe to assume that at the federal level there's like equivalence to your job?
Y- Yes, there are
And
kind
do
of.
those folks still have roles?
Yeah.
Like,
So
do they still exist?
So yeah, another this is really good questions. So Yes, there are Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologists. Um, they honestly it's kind of a skeleton crew compared to like the workload that they have. You have an individual maybe responsible for taking the lead on multiple species that are listed at a given time, and so they are spread so thin that none of them can put the time that they would want to into it. The one guy that with there's probably three, four Fish and Wildlife Service folks that work at least in part on lesser prairie chickens. One guy in particular that is kind of the lead there. He's been so busy or whatnot for the last 3 years, I haven't been able to get him to Colorado to actually see lesser prairie chicken habitat. Our Colorado U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service representative or like biologist has never seen a lesser prairie chicken yet. She's representing lesser prairie chickens because spread so thin, it is yeah, it's a difficult situation there. So they do
Yeah,
not
that's
have
tough.
near the boots on the ground, the manpower, whatnot that they need. So at the end of the day, the bulk of it, as far as biologists working on the species, it's at the state level. And then
Well,
we also have partner biologists, and so um, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, so NRCS, they partner up with Pheasants Forever or Bird Conservancy of the Rockies to put biologists into NRCS offices. And so we have like with Pheasants Forever, we have a phenomenal partner biologist that works out here out of Lamar and is a great partner in this prairie chicken conservation stuff. And so I guess that would be the other bulk of biologists that are helping out on the cause.
that's great to hear. And if you still have the energy to help guide someone to their first experience of seeing a lesser prairie chicken, I have never seen one. So, if she's not free, I can make myself available to see at least one or two. If the, if you're just hankering to get somebody out, I can make myself available.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I will say a caveat. I do draw the line on like people that are legitimately like involved in prairie chicken conservation because I'll get 250 calls a spring of people that are hoping that I get them onto a prairie chicken like right and maybe as a retirement gig I'll start up a tour operation on chickens or whatnot, but like just not there yet. So
what would
yeah.
you call it? What would you call the company? Chasing chickens?
Oh man, I like that. I think that might be it. Chasing chickens. I think that's
Yeah,
pretty good.
yeah.
I'll have to
That
think about it.
or rights on the bird, so
Yeah.
that you can expand
Right on
beyond
the bird. That's
chickens
pretty good.
later.
That's pretty
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
just throw it. Just we're
You can
just
be the
gonna,
marketing guy. How does that sound? We'll partner on
yeah.
that one, man.
We're just spitballing here. Okay, and look, Ashley likes it a lot, so that there goes market
Nice.
value and all
Nice.
that.
Well, I wanted
Oh,
to
the
tell you, I don't know if there's any
greatest.
more. I don't know if there's any more questions, but I wanted to end it on, give the people opportunity to bail if they wanted to, or watch a short video. If it works, I was going to play a video that just actually shows clips from that translocation project, giving a little bit better sense of like how we were capturing birds and how we were handling all that. Of course, I say that, and now my computer is freezing up, so I don't know if you guys can even hear me right now.
We can't hear you.
Okay, all right. All of a sudden, it's not frozen up anymore. So, if there's not any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and at least attempt to switch over to that video. Sound good? Is any more
Yeah,
questions?
yeah, sounds great. I'm sorry, I just for a second, but yeah, the chat is still what we have left in the chat here is from Ashley. Another idea for a touring company name, the greatest Lesser Prairie Chicken Tours.
The greatest.
So you
Yeah,
you got some ideas,
there you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a solid. I got to build back this population of chickens, and if I can do that by the time I retire, then
Right.
there'll definitely be some opportunities down here. I'll have some purple school bus out there or something like that, taking people out to Chicken Lake. So,
Let's do it.
but
But yeah, let's set up that video.
all right, sounds good. Fingers crossed that it's gonna actually work here. So,
I believe in the vision.
you guys hearing that?
Yep.
We're in Scott Lake, Kansas, here at our grouse camp. We're on a lesser prairie chicken translocation project where we're trying to trap lesser prairie chickens so that we can bring them down to southeastern Colorado onto the Comanche National Grasslands and southwestern Kansas onto the Cimarron National Grasslands, where we're trying to recover the population of those species. Just 3 years ago, we were looking at probably less than 50 lesser prairie chickens in the state of Colorado. So the situation for the lesser prairie chicken in our state has become rather dire, and hence this project. We've been trapping prairie chickens now for 3 years. We started in the fall of 2016. We're trapping prairie chickens on leks. Leks are the breeding grounds for lesser prairie chickens. Several grouse species have lekking behavior where they all get together on breeding grounds. The males display. The lek is really a fun thing to watch, all that lekking behavior. The birds are fighting, they're booming and chasing each other around. Lesser prairie chickens make some really crazy sounds. If you ever have the opportunity to watch lesser prairie chickens, I really highly recommend it. I'm kind of biased here, but I think that they're the most interesting of the grouse species and most enjoyable to watch on the lek. So every morning we're trapping these leks. We use 2 different techniques to try to trap these lesser prairie chickens. We have walk-in funnel traps that are 3 foot long by 2 foot tall wire traps. We don't bait them, they just have a wire funnel that goes into the trap, just kind of like a minnow trap or a fish trap. Another way that we trap lesser prairie chickens is we use drop nets. Looks kind of like a circus tent out there on the prairie when we're trapping. And you set that right over the main part of the lek where the dominant males are, hoping to catch the females as they're coming in. Most of the folks that are trapping are in blinds, and so they'll jump out of the blind and you race to the net as fast as you can. You work that bird out and you put it in a pillowcase, and then once we catch those birds and we have them in hand, we load them up in our trucks and put the air conditioning on. We want to keep those birds cool. It seems to reduce their stress. We head to the cabin at Scott Lake and we take a series of measurements on them. We weigh them. We measure some measurements on their heads and their legs, on their wings. Basically, we're looking at some morphometric data. We also, on quite a few birds that we've taken, we've drawn blood, we've taken mouth swab samples because we want to do some disease testing. Because we want to make sure that the birds that we're moving into Colorado and down to Elkhart area in Kansas, that they're healthy and that we're not transporting any diseases into another grouse population or affecting any other wildlife. So while processing the birds, we put a transmitter on every single bird. We want to be able to track their movements and see where they go. Especially for the hens, we want to be able to determine if they're successful at nesting and see where they nest. That's going to help us because we'll be able to learn more about the habitat that they're selecting for nesting, so we can make sure that we can put more habitat and work to get more habitat like that on the ground. Colorado Parks and Wildlife is committed to try to recover and restore endangered and threatened species in the state. So we're doing this project to try to recover one of Colorado's most, I think, iconic grouse species. You know, it's a species that is very much native to southeast Colorado. It's a part of southeast Colorado's history and a favorite animal for a lot of people.
Oh, incredible. Make some noise for Johnathan. You'll love to see it.
So I don't know if you heard it on that video, but you can YouTube it and pull it up or whatnot and listen to it. But
Throw the
there
link in
is,
the
the
chat.
normal lesser chicken booming, but there's actually a hybrid on that lek. You can hear it doing this woo woo woo
I
sound.
thought I heard something.
That's
Throw the
actually a
link in the
hybrid in
chat,
there. So,
Johnathan. Don't be
so,
stingy with it. Throw the link in the chat. Yeah,
so
give us
I
that
got enough going
YouTube
on
link.
here in my computer. That's I don't know. I'm gonna just search in your YouTube Lesser Prairie Chicken Colorado Parks and Wildlife. You'll
I,
pull it up.
I'm looking for it right now.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Because I'm
Juggling
like, you just
screens.
can't show the video and then just.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well,
That's incredible. Oh man. Well, thank you for the inspiring work and the inspiring words. I'm going to hand it over to Linda if you want to close us off. We really appreciate everybody coming in. Just remember those events that were mentioned at the beginning, and we'll see you at the next one.